Hello and welcome again to Lab 4 in the Bayesian Machine Learning module of the FMML course. In this lab, we are looking at some optional mathematics for running our probabilistic models. We'll be dealing with the problem of clustering today. So it's similar to k-means clustering. However, the clustering performed in Bayesian methods is soft clustering, meaning that we'll be instead of assigning a label to every single element, that is, we will not assign a single cluster to every element. We will not say it's in cluster 0, cluster 1 or cluster 2. What we'll say is that it's in cluster 0 with probability 70% and in cluster 1 with probability 20% and so on. We'll be dealing with some mathematics of these probabilistic models. However, that mathematics is completely optional. So let's start off. So here we see some data which is sampled from two different classes. There is this blue class and the red class, and the data is reasonably separated. So as a human, if I tell you that there are two classes and both of them are sampled from some Gaussian and they are separated, it's pretty easy to figure out that this belongs to one cluster and this belongs to the other cluster. Obviously, we'll not be giving the labels red or blue to the model, and we are expecting that it will figure out by itself that all of these L points should have one label and all of these points should have the other label. The way to train such a Bayesian model is called expectation maximization. While we'll not be dealing with the actual mathematics of expectation maximization, we can deal with a slightly reduced form of expectation maximization, which is good for intuition. And what it says is that we'll be proceeding in two stages. In the first stage, we'll start with some guessed parameters for the mean and the variance of both of the classes. Let's take an example. This red class over here and this blue class over here is the guessed parameter. We just randomly say that the mean would be somewhere around 2.5 for the red class and somewhere around 6 for the blue class. And for both of them, the variance would be, say, 1 or something. This is a completely random guess and based on no data. After this, the two stages that we would iterate on are, first we'll be using this data to assign every single data point its correct cluster. So for all of these points, although the colors are inverted, we'll be assigning the Gaussian which has higher probability of covering that point. So this Gaussian should cover all of the red Gaussian should cover all of the blue points, and we attribute the colors appropriately. After computing this, we'll be taking all of these points which have been attributed to one of the clusters based on our random guess, and what we'll be doing is we'll be updating the parameters of the Gaussians based on these points. So we'll take all of these points and we'll compute their mean, all of the blue points means and all of the blue points is variance, and we'll be using that to update this chart on the next stage. And I'm sorry for the colors being inverted across the two columns, but these blue points are used to have a higher variance higher variance curve which fits this, and the red points should fit a slightly lower variance curve on shifted more towards the right. And we see in the inverted colors over here that that's sort of what happens. And as we keep on running our model for more and more iterations, the misattributed labels, which were a lot over here at the start, keep on reducing in number, and eventually we have very few examples which are misattributed, and the two Gaussians have sort of come to the right place. So this is how with expectation maximization we can train unsupervised machine learning models, and given this sort of unsupervised clustering, we'll have the probability for every single data point of being in cluster 1 and the probability of it being in cluster 2, and we can weigh those together. So this is the idea of soft clustering. It's typically more useful because it contains more information than hard clustering, and we know which are the data points where we cannot completely rely, or which are the data points very close to the boundary. Alright, so this sort of a model which takes data points and models them as belonging to one of several Gaussians is called a Gaussian mixture model. Gaussian mixture model form the heart of unsupervised Bayesian machine learning. What we have done over here is that we have made a class for this which handles more than two clusters, and for each of them it tries to model the true mu and the true sigma. So it generates the distribution and then tries to learn the distribution back again. and it runs plots for all of this. So here we have an example with 3 classes, how the attributions keep on changing and how we iteratively model the data better. Finally, here is the true maths of expectation maximization. This mathematics has been discussed in links that are attached in this tutorial and in the next tutorial in the Bayesian methods for hackers course. However, we shall not be discussing this mathematics in the scope of this course. It's important to remember, however, that our explanation of there being 2 stages is not the true explanation and just a placeholder to understand how expectation maximization works. It is sufficient for intuition, but not exactly the mathematics that underlies the EM process. Now that we have seen and we understand the unsupervised soft clustering method of Gaussian mixture models, we shall take a look at PyMC code, which runs these mixture models and estimates the parameters that these mixtures emanate from using the actual expectation maximization or Markov chain Monte Carlo methods that we use to train these models. So we have a lot of code over here which is reasonably derivable from our understanding of the distributions. However, it's not particularly relevant right now to figure out these. All of this is written out well in the PyMC documentation, and you can look directly at that and copy some code to get till here. The PyMC library manages to compute these estimates of all of the 3 Gaussians or 2 Gaussians that the data emanates from, and it computes the probabilities of the points, the mean values over all the iterations it's running of all of the 3 Gaussians, and the standard deviations of all of those 3 Gaussians, and so on. So here you can see that the means are, we had provided the mean values as somewhere over here as 0 plus spread and minus spread, and spread was 5, and you can see in the end that minus 5 plus 5 and 0 are the ones that are the means, and the standard deviation is also well approximated at somewhere slightly over 1, which is almost what we expect given the way that we generated our data. So if you want to soft cluster data and if you know that it emanates from a mixture of a few Gaussians or Gaussian-like random processes, which most data in the world can be modeled as, then you can use all of these modeling methods. All of this is implemented in the scikit-learn library as well as in the PyMC library. So going through the PyMC code is not necessary. The PyMC code allows you to dive deeper into the implementation of the algorithm, but using scikit-learn is sufficient for such unsupervised clustering. Bayes GMM and GMM are 2 separate models. One has a Bayesian approach and the other one does not model all of the probabilities explicitly. Bayes GMM is slower than GMM, but both of those modules are available in scikit-learn. Finally, we take a look at how the k-means outputs are different from Gaussian mixture model outputs. And here you can see that these are the k-means outputs, and here we have the Gaussian mixture model outputs. And typically, the Gaussian mixture model outputs are better at tightly bounding the Gaussians, and although the probability will never fall off to 0, the 1 sigma probability, I presume, has been modeled to a smaller radii, so the red points have been grouped together tighter than they have been grouped together by the k-means. So that's all that we have on Gaussian mixture models applied to 2D data. It would be nice if you could play around with this and see how k-means differs from Gaussian mixture models on different types of data generated. The code provided over here should be sufficient for playing around with. Finally, we come to another form of unsupervised clustering, which is called topic modeling. In topic modeling, we have a bunch of different documents, each of which contains some words. And all of these documents belong to some topics. So given, say for example, we are going to a conference, a bunch of different topics might be machine learning, algorithms, statistics, and so on. And each of those papers in presented to the conference which would have a bunch of different words. These words would belong to one of these four categories. So there would be some words which would be more common amongst statistics papers than amongst computer science algorithms papers, and vice versa. We have already seen this in the previous labs. What we want to figure out in this lab is how can we learn this sort of four clusters in the conference without having any supervision. So we do not have a bunch of different examples to start off with, that these are statistics papers and these are computer science papers and these are machine learning papers. What we have is just a huge set of papers, and in a purely unsupervised fashion, we want to figure out that yes, there are four different topics that these papers are best modeled by, and this group is topic 1, this group is topic 2, topic 3 and topic 4, and we'll not be able to label them who is statistics, who is computer science, but we'll at least know that these are the four groups that can be separated based on the different kinds of words that appear in them. Using this sort of analysis is also useful for other things. Say for example, you have a lot of different writers who are submitting articles to your newspaper. You can try to cluster the different authors together and try to see what are the kinds of patterns behind those authors, what kind of stories they write, how are they different from each other, by manually analyzing the clustered data. So here we have visualized first what is a Dirichlet distribution. You can play around with the x weight, y weight and z weight to shift the density of the distribution along anywhere on the triangle. The idea of understanding this distribution is that if a single word belongs to some category, it is best modeled by a Dirichlet distribution here with 3 output classes. So this vertex over here is one class, this vertex over here is the other class, and this vertex over here is the third class. And here the probability density, red being the highest density, models that the probability of it being in class represented by this vertex over here, let's call it x, and this vertex over here, let's call it at the top, we'll call it y. It being somewhere between x and y is the highest, and it being in z is pretty low. So that is what Dirichlet distributions model. Dirichlet distribution models probability mass split between 3 or more different class outputs. So we'll be going through this example with the NLTK inaugurals dataset. Inaugurals are a bunch of different speeches from presidents of the United States that they have presented on the day that their presidencies were inaugurated. And the first thing that we'll do is we'll remove all the stop words. Stop words are words like is, and, the, which should not contribute to our modeling process. And by removing the stop words and cleaning up our input data and replacing all of the capital letters and other characters and so on, we come up with this output data set, which would be the input for our machine learning model. This has all of the different precedents, the year that the speech was presented in, and the actual contents of the speech with all words in small letters and no non-alphabet words present. So we take this data and we want to model this data into a bunch of different classes. We can take, for example, we'll have 4 classes. So first we compute the entire vocabulary. We generate the vocabulary as a dictionary, and we take the top 201 words in the vocabulary, which is vocabulary with more than 50 occurrences. And we plot the number of occurrences with respect to the ID of the president, and we see how these how the heat map looks. So whenever there are 2 different rows which are similar to each other, because each row represents a single precedent, all of the words they use, whenever there are 2 rows which are extremely similar to each other, then they are speakers of a similar nature. So there are some words which are absolutely common across several of these precedents, and then these precedents over here just don't use those words. And these precedents that come in late use these words down over here at the bottom, word number 188, and do not use words like word number 70. So we already see that there is some amount of clustering, and this will help us split which are the presumably newer precedents from the older precedents, or just people who speak on different issues. Maybe they are Democrats and Republicans and they use fundamentally different words. So that would be the task that we will be trying to undertake with using LDA. So here we use scikit-learn to run our LDA, and we compute 4 components. So we assume that there are 4 different topics that we want to learn about, and the 4 topics that we end up coming with using the standard scikit-learn fit operation are these 4, with the top words being children, together, constitution, citizen, history being in topic 1, revenue, constitutional policy being in topic 2, and so on in topic 3 and topic 4. Also, when we take a look at who are the presidents who use these words, then we notice that in topic 1 we just have Harding. On topic 2 we have Roosevelt, Wilson, Truman, Eisenhower, and so on, and similarly onwards the next 2 groups. If you try to analyze this as a human, you'll be able to understand that these indeed are 4 different topics, which would involve 4 different conversational times and different political ideologies. And therefore this sort of clustering is useful, and we also see that there is a clustering based on dates. So these 2 data sets often have more of the older speeches, whereas all of the newer speeches occur in topic 2, where topic 2 is the one that talks about revenue, constitutional policy, and so on. And this is the sort of rhetoric that goes on in politics today. America, together, help, etc. might have been associated with politics of a place where they would have wanted to help more people because America would not have been as developed a country. Finally, now that we have seen latent Dirichlet allocation in action, each of the words being given probabilities of which topic it belongs to, and that being used to compute the probabilities for all of the documents. What we can say finally is we can construct the same model or similar models using PyMC3, again looking into how the model is made, and here is the code for that. The code is completely optional and you can ignore this code if you do not want to dive into the mathematical details. The scikit-learn implementation is sufficient. So that was all we have for unsupervised clustering and the mathematics that goes behind it. Thanks a lot for listening, and see you in the next lab. Bye bye.